Holy Spirit, may your fresh wind blow through this place this morning. May these words and meditations fall into the hearts and minds of each one here as only you know they need to fall. Amen. So, as some of you know, I spent a week in Haiti, and so I want to tell you a story from our time there. There were three of us, Americans. We were walking on the road from Carcass to Iwa. We were staying in Carcass, and this is the only road that goes to Iwa. It's not a road like we have out here. I found myself being very thankful when I came home that we have such wonderful roads. These roads are deeply rutted by months of erosion and by the use of a lot of motorbikes. There's no pavement pretty much anywhere. They're uneven. And most people travel this road on foot. Hardly anybody has cars. Some people have shoes, others don't. It's a road on which people tether their donkeys and their goats and their cows and all sorts of other animals. So these are the animals that they are living with. So that day, we three Americans, we just needed to get out and get our exercise. We wanted to see a little bit more of the town, so we walked, and we got about halfway there, and we decided we were going to turn around, and we started walking back, and as is the case pretty much everywhere that we went, lots of little children who had never seen a white face before or who see very few of them, they come out and they shout and they say, "Blanc, blanc, white, white," and they come up to you and they gather around you, and they're just so excited and curious to see who are these people. Usually that only lasts for, 30 seconds, a minute, something like that, and then they kind of get back to whatever they're doing and their family. But as we were walking back, one young girl, probably 6 or 7, she just kept walking with us. She didn't go back. And so I said to Jack, do you think she's going to be asking us money? Do you think her parents put it, up to do this and she's going to ask us for money? And we didn't know. She didn't ask for money. We asked her what she was doing, where she was going in our high school French, and that didn't seem to make any difference to her. She didn't understand our French, and we did not understand her Haitian Creole. So we just kept walking. And somewhere down the road, Jack and I were in the front. We were heading up a steep hill, and I think we were probably trying to solve all the world's problems or something like that, all wrapped up in our heads. And all of a sudden, this little girl comes up from behind, tap, tap, tap on the back of my shoulder. And I turned around, and she pointed to Mary, the third American, and she pointed to Mary again and kind of was trying to get our attention. Well, Mary had fallen behind a little bit. She was having a little bit of a struggle, and we were walking too fast. And so here was this 6 or 7-year-old Haitian that we couldn't communicate with, who took the time to notice what was going on with Mary and to tell us, "You better slow down. Your friend is not keeping up here." Pretty nice. So we kept going. The little girl kept on going with us. And a little while later, we're going up another steep hill, and we stopped for a rest. And this time, Jack looked at the little girl, and it was a hot day. She was sweating, and she had no water. So he took his water bottle, and he handed the water bottle to her, and she just got this huge grin on her face and gulped down that water, just like she'd never had water before in her life. Now, those two things seem like pretty ordinary things. These seem like pretty ordinary people. But that was the beauty of it. There we were walking along this road, and each of them took the time to notice the other. They were thinking about the other, even though they didn't know each other. They were strangers, but they took these ordinary moments and made them very special for the other person. There was no sense of one person being better than the other, of one person being more powerful or more correct or more affluent. We were just humans walking along on the road, but who took the time to draw close to one another and pay attention to one another. humans who were just getting to know each other a little bit better and about different ways of life. So simple, so ordinary. So if I were to rename this parable, I think I would call it the ordinary Samaritan instead of the Good Samaritan. Because nowhere in this story, nowhere, does it say anything about good. And yet, this story is the story of the ordinary person taking the time to care and to notice about the stranger. Cross the road, whispers God. Cross the road and find your neighbor. So I doubt that was what the lawyer was expecting to hear when he asked Jesus, when he pressed Jesus to define what neighbors he needed to care for and to love. You know, he probably wanted to hear a nice, simple answer like, you only need to be a neighbor to the people within a mile radius of where you live. Be nice and easy. You could check that box right off. But no, that's not what he got. Now, I can imagine, I was thinking about it, I'd be happy to admit that, I'm happy to be neighbors with someone who thinks the same way as I do, who agree with me, who like my dogs. But please don't make me a neighbor to someone who I don't understand or whose political stance I disagree with or who is difficult to be around. Is it just me? Am I the only one? It is so easy, especially in our suburban life, I think, to forget about being neighbors and widening that circle of who your neighbor is. We were talking about this at youth group last week. We were looking at the similarities and differences between Hartford and Granby and East Heartland. And as we talked, we were talking about the fact that if you lived in Hartford or in a neighborhood somewhere, a tight neighborhood, you ran into your neighbors more often, right? You had each other's backs. But we have more land. Many people have a piece of land. And so it's easier not to cross the road to see your neighbor. It's easier to avoid that. Cross the road anyway, God says. Cross the road and find yourself, even if it's a little scary. And lose the labels. Lose those stereotypes that keep you locked into your one way of life. Lose all of the I should have, I could have ideas. So, did you see what happened in this parable? In Jesus' time, there was this elaborate hierarchy. Many of you probably know this. Within the Jewish tradition, there was kind of a pecking order, and your position determined what you were supposed to do, how you were supposed to live your life. So the priests were expected to follow some very particular rules so that they could stay pure, because the priests were considered to be the closest to God, the most holy. So these holy men weren't supposed to touch a dead body. So in this story, probably they just didn't even cross the road because they thought that person on the other side of the road was dead. And they wanted to protect their own purity and their own status. On the other hand, the Samaritan would have been at the bottom of the pecking order. So Samaritans had split from the priestly Jewish tradition, and so the Orthodox Jews would have seen the Samaritan as someone who didn't worship in the right temple, who didn't read the right version of the holy book, kind of unpure. So this Samaritan would have been considered the bottom of that pecking order, the farthest from God out of those three people that walked down the road that day. But Jesus turns that all upside down. Jesus never does that, right? Turning things upside down. It is the Samaritan who is in touch with his true self, his full humanity, that Jesus lifts up as the model. Now, maybe the Samaritan had been in a bind like this himself sometime and somebody had helped him. Or maybe the Samaritan could empathize and could think, oh, that could happen to me sometime. But either way, the Samaritan seems to understand that our human experiences bind us together. So we have labels on a pecking order too, right? We live in a democracy, and there are still pecking orders. There are still ins and outs, strangers, one, other, all over the place. I'll never forget the time I was walking along the bike path with a high school senior, and a truck came by and someone yelled out the window, "White trash, go home." And it broke my heart, because I was walking with a kid who's one of the smartest kids I've ever met, and I was walking with one of the most creative kids I had ever met. He writes songs with a social critique, and so it's like, he writes the current day version of what U2 does or what the Beatles used to do. He's brilliant, and yet this is what he had to put up with. How many kids, how many of us accept these labels? Smart, stupid, fun, boring, good-looking, fat, hardworking, successful, all of those. Do we accept those? Do we let those hold us in? Or can we let those go and just be human? So this week, Mark and I went to a story slam up in Northampton, and as I think we all do, again, maybe it's just me, but I looked at the storytellers, there were 10 of them, and I looked at them and I started categorizing. Older, younger, male, female. What I soon found out was that all of those categories couldn't even begin to describe these amazing people. So in that group, there was a female cab driver and a guy who grew up poor but happy, a man who saved a young girl from getting stabbed in New York City in a park, and another who helped a cow birth her calf on the African savannah. Pretty good, huh? Mark and I looked at each other and said, wow, we are so boring compared to these people. But the point is that after 5 minutes, they only shared one story, 5 minutes, and what became so apparent so quickly is how much more than categories they were, how rich lives these people had. And I think one of the things that really hit me about this story is that those two priests were a little bit attached to their labels, to their stereotypes. They were trying to do this striving, this walking, this particular way. And what was different about the Samaritan is that all fell away. That Samaritan was just being an ordinary human being, no striving, no labels. You and I, just like that Samaritan, we are enough, just as we are, living into our humanness. Cross the road, whispers God, again and again and again. Cross the road and remember you're part of something bigger. So I was thinking about how this parable would play out if Jesus were to show up here today in Granby, Connecticut. I got a little carried away about thinking about what kind of car Jesus would drive. I must say, would Jesus drive a Prius? Good for the environment. Would Jesus drive a truck? All of his carpentry materials? Or would Jesus maybe have an Oldsmobile or something? I got a little carried away about that. Not part of the story. Sorry. So let's say Jesus shows up at the community dinner on Wednesday night. And somebody just says, Jesus, who is my neighbor? And this is what Jesus might say. There's a single mom who drove out here to get a healthy hot meal for herself and her 2 kids. After dinner, she heads home to her sister's apartment in Hartford, where she lives. As she and her kids head into the apartment, they get caught in gang crossfire. The mom takes a bullet, the gang members flee, the children are traumatized. The first person to go by is jamming out to his Christian music while texting. He doesn't stop. The second person to go by is a lost suburbanite trying to get to a Christian ecumenical gathering. She doesn't stop. Finally, the guy who grew up in a gang and doesn't belong to any particular religion drives by. He sees the woman on the ground, the aunt and the children wailing outside of the apartment door. He crosses the road to see what's happened. He puts the woman in his car, gives his cell phone number to the aunt, and races to Hartford Hospital. If Jesus asked you which of these three people you thought was a neighbor to the woman, who would you say? And Jesus says, go and do likewise. Now you and me, we're ordinary people. We're not heroes. Well, some of you may be. But we're ordinary. We're human. And you are already doing this kind of work. Still, God whispers, cross the road again. Find yourself. Remember that you're part of something bigger. Find the neighbor you don't know yet. Cross the road again and again and again.